Good morning. It is Tuesday, the 30th of June. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily update of European news and analysis, live here on Euronews. Coming up, a huge blow for the Mannschaft. Four-time World Cup winner Germany crashes out of the World Cup in a dramatic penalty shootout. We'll cross live to Berlin for all the reactions. And after delicate talks in Brussels with his Chinese counterpart, the EU's top trade negotiator, Maros Sefcovic, has set an October deadline to resolve a long list of trade disputes between Brussels and Beijing. We'll have the latest from our correspondent, Angela Scugins. Meanwhile, Europe's deadly heat dome has moved east, with red warnings issued today in Hungary, Poland and Romania, and authorities urging people to stay indoors. Across the continent, wildfires have broken out, while violent storms and flash floods have also been reported. Plus, the EU's lending arm, that's the European Investment Bank, has announced its largest ever commercial loan, a €3 billion package for the European aircraft manufacturer Airbus. We'll speak exclusively to the bank's president, Nadia Calviño. But first, US and Iranian delegations are heading to Qatar today, although no direct bilateral meeting has been confirmed. The talks were expected to focus on implementing the Memorandum of Understanding signed recently between Washington and Tehran. But expectations are low, and even President Trump appears to have lost his enthusiasm. Donald Trump lowering his expectations really ahead of those talks. For more on the talks, we can head now to Qatar and bring in our correspondent, Leila Humarai, who's following the talks for us this morning. Look, a lot of confusion over the talks, Leila, whether they're happening. Just tell us what is going on.
Good morning, Maeve. That's right. Our team here in Doha is closely watching developments of these negotiations that are set to take place here in Doha today and this week. Although, as you mentioned, doubts still remain whether Iran will attend or if they will meet with the U.S. delegation face to face. What seems clear is that Trump's special envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are on their way to Qatar and set to be arriving in the coming hours later today, which we'll also be keeping a close eye on. Now, following that breakthrough in Switzerland and these talks in Doha, it seems that Qatar's role in mediating have stepped up. And as mediators, what Qatar and Pakistan would want is for both sides, the US and Iran, to either preserve or advance the Memorandum of Understanding and roadmap that both have agreed to in Switzerland. So regardless of where these talks and negotiations take place, the upcoming weeks will be crucial for all parties involved.
And just tell us, meanwhile, what is the situation along the Strait of Hormuz?
That's right. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz remains extremely fragile, with tensions and attacks flaring up again just a couple of days ago. Now, traffic has been trickling very slowly, but it's clear that it's far and well below its normal capacity. Now, the critical shipping waterway effectively is still being controlled by Iran, despite what the U.S. says that freedom of navigation has been restored and the situation is under control. Tehran instead has been doubling down on its grip on the Strait of Hormuz by essentially warning again ships and vessels that they can only take routes that have been approved by the IRGC. And we know that this is a major sticking point. Reopening of the Strait of Hormuz is a major sticking point in these negotiations.
OK, Leila Humarai keeping a very close eye on that story for us. Thank you so much for that live broadcast there from Doha. But now, turning to trade. In closely watched talks, China's Commerce Minister has wrapped up meetings with the EU Trade Chief Maros Sefcovic. Talks went late into the night to try to trash out a deal on how to manage the mammoth trade deficit, which is not in Europe's favour. Our correspondent, Angela Scugins, followed the late night talks and is here with us now in the studio. Angela, will more talks narrow this gap, do you think?
Good morning, Maeve. So this is certainly the hope of the European Commissioner for Trade, Maroš Šefčovič. Over a week ago, he was given a mandate by the 27 EU heads of state to try and figure out a way forward when it comes to these macroeconomic imbalances. This is a shorthand in Brussels for that mammoth trade deficit valued at 360 billion euros, with Beijing having the upper hand here. Right now, Europe's market is currently flooded with a glut of cheap Chinese-made goods made through subsidies. We're talking about batteries, cars and other electronics. Now, Šefčovič is following a two-prong approach, speaking to China, but also exploring what's in Europe's arsenal to bring China to the negotiating table. But it's super fragile because Beijing has threatened to retaliate if the EU is too bolshy. But we did hear from the Commissioner. He released a statement halfway through these talks Monday evening in which he stated China's export to the EU keeps rising while our market share in China keeps shrinking. The status quo is not an option. Our teams have a clear mandate to deliver tangible results by October this year. So the Commissioner clearly setting a timeline here. He wants outcomes by October. But I spoke to a trade expert, Alicia Garcia Herrero, who gave us a bit of an outline of how these conversations could have actually unfolded behind the scenes, and stating that unless Europe is serious with its wish list, China won't take the continent seriously.
So if I were China, I would come on and say, you don't seem ready to take decisions. Remember, we will retaliate. That's what I was going to say. The question is, we should put on the table a clear negotiation scheme. That's what we want, A, B, C. And the question is, do we have that? Do we have that wish list that one should bring back home to avoid a trade war?
And if not, does that mean we could be heading towards this trade war?
So the diplomats that I've spoken to have stated that this is not clearly what's happening. The scenes between China and the EU doesn't resemble what we're seeing between the US and China, for example, severe escalation. There's also quite a bit of optimism from the European Commissioner here, setting that October deadline, stating that there'll be a clear roadmap for negotiations and how those talks could resemble. But Alicia Garcia Herrero has stated that the writing is clearly on the wall. China isn't playing ball here, and this could be seen as late last year when they slapped export controls on critical rare earth minerals, and Europe really needs to wake up and deal with the beast in the east.
We're not starting a war. We're just basically leveling the playing field. So for me, that would be the narrative we should use.
So after these talks in October, what is clear is that Brussels needs to explore what else it can do, whether this is triggering the anti-coercion instrument, so shutting off China from the EU's single market, whether other options are on the table, such as export controls, quotas, tariffs, or more dialogue is needed. The Commissioner did state that through every conversation, progress is being made, but whether this progress is valued at 360 billion euros is yet to be seen, Maeve.
That indeed is the question. Very delicate talks. Angela Scugins, thank you so much for that very comprehensive update. But now moving on, the European Investment Bank has announced its largest ever commercial loan, dedicating €3 billion to boosting aerospace giant Airbus. For more on the deal, Euronews' Mairead Gwynn spoke exclusively to the bank's president, Nadia Calvino, and started by asking her whether this investment was a response to the competitiveness crisis facing Europe.
We are announcing a flagship deal. It's a loan to Airbus, a €3 billion loan, the largest ever to a corporate by the European Investment Bank, precisely to support their strategic plan in the area of aerospace and also security and defence. I think it's a good illustration of how Europe is ramping up its capacity and strategic autonomy.
And I must ask you, because recently we saw a major project collapse, essentially, the Franco-German fighter jets project, because companies couldn't see past their industrial rivalries and work together towards a common goal. Is that a problem that you see in Europe?
Well, it is an issue, the fact that we're 27 countries, 27 democracies, and obviously there are divergent views on many issues. But that's why it's so important to flag this agreement with Airbus, because Airbus is the great success story of Europe. Profitable company, a global leader in key areas, aerospace, security and defense. And so that's why I think it is important to also flag those areas where we are moving in the right direction, as is the case in this loan.
And it is true that the EIB is shifting its focus more towards defence investments. Do you see that as the future of your institution, moving more into becoming almost a defence bank? And where does that leave other priorities like energy and green policies and so on?
The European Investment Bank has proven to be flexible to adjust to Europe's changing priorities. We need to adjust to the new geopolitical context, and we're very strongly aligned with Europe's policy priorities and the member states that are our shareholders. As you know, the 27 member states, our governors have endorsed our roadmap, our strategic roadmap, which has 3 top priorities. The first one is consolidating our role as the climate bank. Secondly, technological leadership, supporting innovation and scaling up. And thirdly, security and defense. And we are playing our role as Europe's financing arm, but also one of the world's largest multilateral development institutions in these 3 areas in particular.
Of course, the political rhetoric around the importance of climate policies, climate mitigation investments has really shifted in recent years. If we were sitting here 5 years ago, the rhetoric coming from the Commission here was very different. Do you fear that there's a rhetoric, a discourse now that says that climate policies and Europe's industrial competitiveness are incompatible?
I think that beyond noise and rhetoric, as you're saying, and not very productive debates, in my view, the reality is quite stubborn. And the reality is that there is an energy revolution in full swing in Europe and the world. The reality is that we need to break free from our excessive dependence on fossil fuels. I mean, more and more often I have the impression that the EIB is not only Europe's climate bank, but the world's climate bank, because in many other jurisdictions, maybe they have a different narrative. But the reality is that private companies are also getting on with it and investing in the clean transition, because it's not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do.
But we did hear you leaders back in February promise this new economic reset, a new economic agenda by June. That's kind of past now, and the global economic outlook is clearly much more gloomy due to the war in Iran. Do you worry about that broader outlook and what it could mean for Europe?
Well, obviously, the geopolitical context is very complex, and the geoeconomic context is very complicated, because all the elements that have underpinned Europe's phenomenal success since the end of World War II are being put to the test, or openly contested and challenged or attacked from many sides. But that, in this context, it is more important than ever that we have a clear compass, that we keep united, because united we are very powerful. I always say we're unstoppable, where we join our forces, European Union countries, and determined, to pursue this path. And what I see is a strong determination on the side of our leaders to continue to face those challenges together.
Nadia Calvino there speaking to our Marit Gwynn. But next, big news from Serbia. President Aleksandar Vučić has said he will resign and call early elections, with mass protests mounting pressure from Brussels and the country's EU ambitions hanging in the balance. Our Jakub Janis looks beyond this headline.
Serbia is experiencing a monumental political shakeup. Last weekend, President Aleksandar Vučić stunned the nation by announcing he will resign within weeks and called early presidential and parliamentary elections. But your reporter has one advice: do not mistake this for a total surrender. This move looks more like a calculated strategy from a politician who has dominated Serbian politics since 2012. Let's investigate, shall we? What you need to know is that for over 18 months, student-led demonstrations have been shaking Belgrade. This protest movement erupted after a tragic railway station canopy collapse in Novi Sad, killing 16 people and exposing, according to students and opposition parties, systemic state corruption. And Vučić is launching now a tactical pivot, constitutionally barred from seeking another presidential term next year. Experts expect him to return to power by running for prime minister instead. With local polling placing his party at 47% voter support and the student movement at just under 31%, Vučić is gambling that snap elections will consolidate his rule. And he routinely brands the protesters as foreign agents who want to destabilize the country. At the same time, he pledges to accelerate EU membership goals, while fiercely protecting traditional alliances with Moscow and Beijing. This geopolitical tightrope is becoming incredibly expensive. The EU is currently waiting a critical decision to slash up to 1.5 billion euros in development funds. And Brussels is highly alarmed by laws that strip judges of their independence, violent police crackdowns on student rallies, and constant state interference in independent newsrooms. And as the biggest financial backer of the country, the EU provided over €500 million in non-repayable grants between 2021 and 2024. And actually, official figures from Belgrade reveal that total EU funding and investments have surpassed €7 billion since the year 2000. For a long time, Vučić has aimed to appease Brussels just enough to safeguard that cash without sacrificing his eastern allies. Now the presidency will change hands, but the main force of Serbian politics has no plans to retire from the political stage.
Jakub Janis reporting for us there. And now it's time for our FIFA World Cup update. Well, it was a terrible night for European football overall, and heavyweights Germany and the Netherlands are both out after penalty shootout. It's the first time they lose in a World Cup penalty shootout. It's the first big surprise of the tournament. For the reactions in Berlin, we can go straight over to Germany and bring in our Laura Fleischmann, who's following the match and the reactions for us. Laura, what a blow. I mean, the individual talent on the German team is bigger than this terrible result. Germans must be shocked this morning.
Good morning, Maeve. And yes, German football fans were very shocked. This was a disappointing loss, truly a catastrophic loss against Paraguay. Many people thought this would be a safe win. However, the German players failed to convince during this game. They failed to take control of the game, even though they scored a second goal, which was perhaps unfairly disallowed. And German football coach Julian Nagelsmann told the players beforehand to be a little bit more streetwise in their approach to this game. However, they failed to do so as well. And going forward, Nagelsmann already stated that he's not planning on resigning. He said that he wants to remain head coach unless the German Football Association, the DFB, asks him to resign. But there has been a name thrown into the ring for a new potential head coach, Jürgen Klopp.
OK, a very familiar name, of course. Laura Fleischmann, thank you so much for that live broadcast there from Berlin. And a similar downbeat energy in the Netherlands today, who've also got to pack their bags after drawing Morocco 1-1 and then losing in the penalty shootout. Meanwhile, Brazil beat Japan 2-1 in a last-minute victory during extra time and will face the winner of tonight's clash between Norway and the Côte d'Ivoire in the round of 16. Also coming up tonight is France and Sweden facing each other in a European duel at 11 CET. And of course, Morocco awaiting as their rival in the next phase. But that brings this edition of Europe Today to an end. Thank you so much for your company as always. Do reach out to us at europetoday@euronews.com with any of your thoughts or points. But stay with us now as well for more news on Euronews.